It's July 23rd, 2026. Welcome to yes2howwhat.com. Many people respond to my videos on social media by saying the law is this or the law is that, or people simply have to comply because it's the law. Those responses have become so common that they reveal something much deeper than disagreement. They reveal an assumption. Most people speak about the law as though everyone already understands what it is. But do we? What is law? Is law merely whatever a legislature enacts? Is it whatever a judge declares? Is it whatever a police officer enforces? Does law come into existence because someone in authority writes words onto paper? Or does it exist independently of those who exercise political power? Those are not abstract philosophical questions. They are the very foundation upon which every government, every court, every statute, and every claim of authority ultimately rests. If we never ask what law actually is, then we can never meaningfully ask whether a particular law is just, whether government power has limits, or whether rights exist before government itself. For much of human history, some of history's greatest philosophers, jurists, and statesmen understood law very differently than many people do today. They did not begin with the assumption that man creates law. Rather, they believed that true law exists before governments, before legislatures, and even before kings. The task of those entrusted with authority was not to invent law, but to discover, understand, and faithfully apply principles that already existed. Think of the law of gravity, for example. The modern world has largely reversed that understanding. Today, many people equate law with legislation, authority with power, and obedience with justice. In doing so, they often fail to recognize the profound consequences of placing imperfect human beings in positions of creating the very rules by which all others must live. The discussion that follows explores that distinction. It asks a simple but fundamental question: what is law? Because until we answer that question, we cannot intelligently discuss rights, freedom, government, justice, or the proper limits of political power. There is another reason this discussion matters. When we honestly examine modern government, we discover that many who occupy positions of public authority, whether they are city council members, county supervisors, legislators, judges, police officers, sheriffs, administrators, regulators, or countless other public officials, they have received little meaningful education in the philosophical foundations of law, natural rights, constitutional limitations, or the true purpose of government. Their understanding often begins and ends with statutes, regulations, departmental policies and procedures, and compliance. Consequently, their entire mode of operation, their mindset, their heart set, and ultimately their conduct is frequently shaped by a single underlying assumption: I hold office. I possess authority. Therefore, what I say goes, because I decide what goes. I decide what is ordinance, law, statute, regulation. That assumption is not simply mistaken. It represents a complete inversion of the historical understanding of law. If law is something to be discovered, then every public official is first bound by it before he may ever enforce it upon another. His office does not elevate him above law, it subjects him to it. His authority is not self-defining, it is limited by principles that exist independently of his title, badge, robe, or office. But if law is viewed merely as something created by those who possess political power, then office itself becomes the source of authority. The badge becomes justification. The title becomes the argument. Power becomes its own proof. That is not the rule of law. It is the rule of men. When those entrusted to administer government no longer understand that law exists to limit their own authority before it governs the citizen, the relationship between government and the people is quietly inverted. Public servants begin to act as masters. Citizens gradually come to believe they exist to comply rather than to remain free. Authority is measured by position instead of principle, and obedience becomes valued above justice. The tragedy is that this misunderstanding is shared not only by many officials but also by the people themselves. Citizens often approach government believing that the official standing before them possesses lawful authority simply because he occupies an office. Rarely do they ask the prior question: what is the source and limit of that authority? As a result, the people begin almost every encounter from a position of defeat, not because they lack intelligence or courage, but because they have unknowingly accepted the same false premise as those exercising power. If both government and officials and the public assume that law is simply whatever those in office declare it to be, then the most important question is never asked: by what principle is that exercise of authority itself limited? Until that question returns to the center of public discourse, the people will continue to debate statutes while overlooking the very foundation upon which all legitimate law must rest. They will argue over commands while neglecting the principles that determine whether those commands possess moral and lawful legitimacy in the first place. History demonstrates that liberty is seldom lost in a single dramatic moment. More often it is surrendered gradually, one misunderstanding at a time. And perhaps no misunderstanding is more consequential than confusing the exercise of power with the existence of law. So what follows invites the reader to consider one of civilization's oldest questions: not what government commands, not what legislators enact, not what courts have written, but something far more fundamental. What is law? For if we misunderstand the very nature of law itself, we will inevitably misunderstand authority, jurisdiction, rights, freedom, justice, and the power relationship between the people and those who have been entrusted to serve the people. Before we can understand government, we must first understand law. And before we can understand law, we must determine whether it is something that men create or something they are first obligated to discover, respect, and obey. And as always, may truth reign supreme.